Tonight on Life on the Rock, we have Dr. Stacy Trasancos, Part 1, I'll Give a Reflection, and much more. Welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight, our guest is Dr. Stacy Trasancos. She is a Ph.D. chemist. She's an adjunct professor of science and theology at Holy Apostles College and other places. And tonight, she's talking about faith and science. She's written a book, Particles of Faith. So she's going to tell us about that relationship and how it's blessed her in her career.
This is the first of 2 shows with her, and we're now going to a reflection with Father Mark.
I'm here at Lucas Oil Field. This is the great stadium where the Indianapolis Colts play. They won a Super Bowl championship, I believe, and they have their great players enshrined here. Their names are up on the walls. You have like Peyton Manning and others, Eric Dickerson. This is where the closing mass is going to be. Thousands and thousands of people. It's a great expression of the unity of the church that we're brought together as a family and unity. I heard an example one time, an analogy of heaven as being like a stadium where people are cheering as we go in, right? As maybe go through purgatory, whatever day we finally enter into heaven, people will be cheering us on. They'll be praying for us, the saints who prayed for us in this life, cheering us on their feet, right? Because they've seen our struggles. So may we all be there together. Stacy Trasancos, welcome to Life on the Rock.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
And we're going to do 2 shows with you. The first show, I want to talk a little bit about your own faith journey and the overall general relationship between faith and science. First, tell us a little bit about your educational background.
Well, I was one of these kids who loved science for as long as I can remember. I remember growing up and being amazed at science, and I went off to college then when I got old enough, and I majored in biology. And I left my Southern Baptist upbringing behind when I went off to college. It was actually in 1991, the same year that REM song came out, Losing My Religion. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking that that's what I do. I'm gonna not, I don't worry about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny anymore. I'm not gonna worry about going to church. And
did you come from a family of scientists?
No, I didn't. I just discovered my own passion for how nature works. You know, as a child in Texas, you know, outside, running around barefoot all the time, playing. I had a wonderful childhood playing in the woods near our house outside and streams and climbing trees. And I just became fascinated with how nature works. And it became cemented in my mind as I got older that science has the answers to the questions that religion does not. So religion just seemed kind of like something you choose to do if you want to be part of that social club. And right. I didn't. I wanted to pursue science.
And you speak about like the awe and wonder that children often have, and you certainly had, looking at the world, the natural world.
Yeah, I remembered reflecting on that, writing the book. I remembered looking back at my childhood, and my earliest memories were of awe and wonder, because I remember my mother telling me, God made the big round sun, and God made me. God made the birds and the trees, and I just remember that actually fueled my fascination as a small child, thinking that God made everything and God made me. That fueled my fascination and my awe and wonder. And I realized when I got into my 30s, I had lost that. I no longer thought about science in that way. I just thought of it as a bag of facts. Right. And something I do, very mechanical, very machinery, and a big part of my life was missing then because I hadn't tended to the more personal aspects of who I am.
Right. And in your book, Particles of Faith, you talk about some of the particular projects you worked on at Penn State. You went on to get a Ph.D. in chemistry, and you get into a lot of details there in the book. Yeah. And you're trying to look at photosynthesis and just the amazing aspect of sunlight being converted into energy, being converted into biomass, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we get all the biomass on the
It's
planet,
amazing.
right?
I
Yeah.
mean, photosynthesis uses 6 times more energy than the entire human population every year. And it takes our breath, carbon dioxide, and it takes water, and it takes photons of light from the sun, and it converts it into all the biomass, meaning all the living things on the planet. It's this beautiful process.
Because you have plants, and the animals eat the plants, right? So it's at the heart of all of it.
And so the photosynthesis makes these 3 carbon precursors, which go on to make all the biological molecules. So the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, small molecules that go into making all of the larger biomolecules like DNA and RNA and the proteins that all living things are made up of. And that whole process begins with photosynthesis, the sun shining down energy onto the planet, and water in our breath basically is how everything grows.
It's using the CO2 from our breath.
Yes,
right?
and it's making the oxygen that we need to breathe. So it's this beautiful interconnected cycle.
Right. So you got you're holed up in your lab, and you're frustrated, right? On a particular day, you look at a tree, and what happens?
Yes, I describe in the book this ginkgo biloba tree at Penn State University that extended up to the 3rd floor of Chanley Laboratory where my lab was. And my job in Ph.D. school at Penn State was to simulate electron transfer process in photosynthesis.
One electron?
One electron. So there's like 10 to 20 steps in nature, in natural photosynthetic systems, across this lipid bilayer in the thylakoid membrane in these little chloroplast organelles. And it's this amazing nano factory in the plant. And all my job was to create these inorganic, organic composite materials that would have one electron jump, an electron jump from one polymer layer to the next across an inorganic membrane and stay put. And we did it. We got published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society. It was state-of-the-art, cutting-edge stuff, but I knew as a scientist who didn't think much about God, I knew when I was trying to get the electron to jump twice, so I was struggling because I couldn't make the electron do what I needed it to do so I could publish papers and graduate and get a job. And I'm looking out the window one day, and it hit me looking at the tree. You know, here's little Stacy from my childhood with the awe and wonder, long gone because I've just become very mechanically minded. And I'm looking at this tree. I'm at this precipice in my career where if I can't get this thing done, I might not graduate. And I'm panicking. And it hits me that tree is doing something that I have no prayer of doing in the most sophisticated lab there was at the time for that kind of thing. And I had this moment of grace where it's like me in the laboratory, and that tree is across this big chasm, and I'm staring into the face of God like, oh my goodness, who is this great chemist out there who's made all these things? I saw it in that moment, but it always struck me as funny because I didn't get down on my knees and give my life to God. I didn't go back to church. I didn't start believing again. I got angry because I knew I couldn't do what that tree was doing, and I just wanted to graduate. And that moment stayed with me, though. You know, it was about 15 years later before I came to grips with that.
Maybe part of the conclusion for you is that like science can't give us all the answers, right? Even to the natural world, right? It can't. No, there's science itself is a mystery. There's so many things we don't understand in science. You're kind of, when I was a scientist, I felt like I was climbing a mountain. And first of all, I'm only looking down at the ground. And I'm trying to scale this little bit of the mountain and understand what I can learn about atoms and molecules and chemistry and biology. And there's still so much more that I'll never know. There's still vast amounts of knowledge I'll never obtain just with that. Converting was like
looking up from the mountain. So I'm even more awed now, but even more humbled, because I'm not going to be able to know everything as this one little human person.
We got to go to a break. We'll be back with Stacy in just a moment. Well, Stacy, I think what you're hitting upon is, in science, like the more we know about phenomena, the more questions we have. We can always seem to go deeper. Theologians point out that the whole world is charged with the mystery, reflecting the mystery of God. There's something that we can't even fully penetrate with our reason.
Yes, science now brings me closer to God. And I teach at Seton Hall University and Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And I love to tell college students that science is the study of God's handiwork. Stop thinking about science as something separate from faith. Think of it like this, that when, nature is God's creation. We believe that God created everything, visible and invisible. The natural world is God's creation. And when you study it at a scientific level, and you know what happens in photosynthesis, and you know what happens with atoms and why they bond, you're very privileged to understand more about the mind of God. And that awe and wonder comes back in spades then. It's amazing. I've had students get upset at balancing chemical equations or deriving equations in physics. And I kind of say, don't get mad at me, get mad at God, because the world is so ordered. The world has such crazy order in it. And if you go out and you become a Ph.D. level scientist or a working scientist, your job is to discover new things about the natural world. And think about what that means. When you discover something new in the natural world, you are the first person ever to understand something new about how God created the world. And that's pretty cool. That's better than getting published in a scientific journal or getting your degree so you can graduate and get a job. That changes the whole meaning of it. And I've had students really wake up to that idea and understand, they don't need to set their faith aside when they become scientists. They need to practice their faith and practice virtue, and there's a place for ethics and scientific decisions. But they also need to let the science awe and wonder them with the magnificence of God and privilege at what they're able to understand, that we have an intelligible world and we're intelligent beings who get to do science. So it changes the way you see everything. That old faith in science conflict myth is long gone, like old cobwebs.
Right,
we're done with that.
Yeah, it's still being drummed up in some places.
Yes.
Yeah, but there is no conflict. In fact, I was just reading in the prologue of John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. And that word, Cardinal Ratzinger wrote about, the Greek word is logos, meaning reason, that God creates this ordered world. He calls it like a creative reason that reflects this order of God. And so that sends, the man of faith, the scientist of faith is sent into that world. He's motivated, right, to discover more what God has created here.
Yes, and suddenly the pursuit of knowledge just for the sake of knowledge becomes a very beautiful thing. We're not just trying to turn everything into technology, but it gives us a chance to really understand what God has done and the importance of this thing we call our world that we live in, and to understand more about our own bodies and how they work. So it's a great thing. And I even say evangelize through science. We don't need to, when I became Catholic, I caught it from people. How can you be a scientist? How can you believe in God when there's no empirical evidence? Like you're not looking at it the right way when people say that. Yeah. Evangelize through science. We as Catholics have nothing to worry about in the scientific method. We have nothing to fear there because we are studying God's handiwork. And the scientific method would not exist if we didn't view science with a Catholic worldview.
Right.
We view the world as created with order, logos, created with order and created good, intelligible. And if scientists, believers or non-believers alike, if they didn't expect the world to be ordered, if they didn't expect things to be consistent and beautiful, they wouldn't be able to design experiments and test out how things work. They fundamentally expect the world to be ordered.
And that's why people have to realize, right, there's this great history with Christianity and science. The universities and scientists with their personal faith that drives them.
Yep.
So it's a tremendous, you're right, I think that Christianity is like a womb of for science, right?
I get that from Father Stanley Yaki.
Okay.
He has this thesis that science was born of Christianity. And that gets controversial because it sounds like a triumphant claim, but that's not what he was doing at all. It's a human story. We're human and we're rational. We're made to investigate the world. But he does make the point, you need a Christian worldview to understand what science is and why we do science, and better, where we're going with science. So the church is very big on guarding, like a mother, this thing we call science, and guarding it about the direction we go. Like the church is very involved in artificial intelligence right now. The ethics of it, like when do you cross the line and it's not ethical? What is okay, what's not okay? Very helpful in trying to figure out these things, putting up the guardrails, so to speak, just like she did with evolution and is doing with AI and bioethics. And that's a wonderful thing, which is one of the reasons why I tell young people, if you're inspired to be a scientist, if you're called to be a scientist, go for it. We need more Catholics who are practicing scientists.
Right. Let's go back to something you just mentioned. I hear this a lot. Okay, where is God? Where's the empirical data for the existence of God? This empirical measurable data. What is your answer to that person?
That question is a misunderstanding of what things are. So there are material things, there are physical things that exist, but there are other things that exist that aren't material. There are immaterial realities as well. And I frankly, a lot of our culture is just not in tune with that kind of thinking, but you have to be if you're Catholic. The person is body and rational soul. And so even Aristotle, I love when I learned about this, even Aristotle figured out there must be God, a creator, by reason alone. So this is way before there was the divine revelation of Jesus Christ. Aristotle even figured out there has to be God, and he figured out some divine attributes of God. And the church says we can know that God exists through reason alone, through the created world. And the way I say that is, we can look at what science has told us and reason our way to the existence of God. We can look beyond what sciences say, the why of science. A student just told me this week, I love learning about this. We're reading some encyclicals and some of Father Yaki's work. She said, in science class, it's all just facts. And it's like we take everything apart and we study it, but she said we never put it back together again. And understanding why we even do science was a great thing for her to learn and realize. We're called to do that.
Well, we've got about a minute left. What about engaging atheists today? What's a good methodology there?
I say lean into it. Evangelize through science, meaning don't worry about science. If the atheist is wanting to know more about science and love science, go along with that. Go into it. Dive into it. Don't be afraid of what scientists are saying. They're going to have wrong theories. They're going to get corrected. Science is a search for truth too. Lean into that. A lot of times what I see is that people think it has to be faith or science, and it doesn't. And if you encounter someone who's a non-believer and you act like you're afraid of science because you're a believer, that's not going to evangelize very well. And my message is always, science is the study of the handiwork of God. So just lean into it. The atheist won't see it as the handiwork of God, but the atheist also doesn't have an answer to the biggest why of all. Where does all this come from? What caused all of this? And so accompany that person to get to that question. So you're climbing the mountain with them, and then help them look up at some point.
Well, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us on Life on the Rock. Brother John, I feel like I covered a lot of ground with Stacy. What was your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate the intellectual humility with Stacy. And I think, all these worlds of science, of philosophy, of religion, a lot of times it gets very complex. And I think, we have to be kind of slow and methodical. And I think the church does a very great job at doing that. It just doesn't rationally or irrationally just jump into things, but it carefully weighs and studies, and it wants to know man, nature, all those things that point to God. Our Creator, who's given us life, who's given order to our universe. And a lot of times whenever we come into these contacts and realities of just the science world, it can be intimidating. I'm not a scientist. Right. She's speaking way over my head. But it's very interesting to see her approach to faith, of really realizing how well-ordered our universe is, and that it does point to God.
And it's part of our mission, and it's part of in our nature, right, to know, to understand. Yeah. But you think of like God bringing all the animals to Adam to name, right? He's doing science, he's categorizing, he's understanding. It's like a first step. Yeah. So to have faith does not contradict that in any way. In fact, I like to say as well, it's like if I'm going to give myself God, I need to, because I have an intellect and will, I have reason, I have free will, I'm naturally driven to know. Yeah. So to know God, and I grow in my love with that accompanying knowledge. And so, we have to bring that into our faith life, and of course in the natural world. But we see that faith needs reason, and reason needs faith. Yeah.
And they go together, and I think, the church has been preaching this since forever, especially in the Middle Ages, around the time of a lot of the scientific discoveries. And the church is not anti-science by any means. It's been a great promoter and patron of the sciences, of the universities, of developing man's intellect. And so I think we see that with Stacy and where she's gone, and what she can bring into the 21st century.
All right, we'll send you into that vineyard with a blessing. May our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you. May He give you His peace. May He fill you with a love for the created world and a faith to bring into the world to help others to find Him. May God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week on Life on the Rock.